Many people claim that Jinx is a murderer, and they are wrong. Here, let me show you why. Incident 1. The monkey bomb. The most important things to keep in mind here are 1. The ultra-paradoxical stage of transmarginal inhibition. And 2. If Powder had not deployed the monkey bomb, Silco would have hunted Vander and his family to death anyway, even had they escaped. And it was unlikely they would have escaped, as Silco's shimmered-up henchmen would have just followed them outside as the guards. Outside sounded the alarm, so to speak. Furthermore, Vander was losing clout due to his inaction. And while his submissive behavior was born out of his love for his people, ultimately, it would not satisfy the people's lust for change. Vander and his family would have eventually been displaced and killed no matter what. Yes, the monkey bomb did kill Milo and Clagger, and that is unfortunate. Powder was simply unequipped to save everyone, as she was just an 11-year-old girl, and frankly, had that one hex crystal blown in the other direction, towards Silco and his crew, they'd all still be alive and it all would have gone perfectly. But luck was not fully on Powder's side. Although, the monkey bomb did still have benefits. It kept Vander from being hunted to death, as it set the situation up to allow Singe to smuggle Vander back to his laboratory to make Warwick. The detonation also kept Powder from being killed, because it stressed Silco and his crew to the point of the ultra-paradoxical stage of transmarginal inhibition, wherein Silco was thereby convinced to make Powder his adopted daughter, as his view toward Powder had been completely flipped. The explosion also set the situation up whereby Marcus was able to kidnap Vi and keep her, somewhat safely, in Stillwater Prison. So basically the monkey bomb set up a paradigm, social and psychological, where the three ended up being shielded from Silco's murderous plans. Vander being shielded by Singed, Vi being shielded by Marcus, and Powder being shielded by Silco himself due to his wildly altered mental state after the monkey bomb induced the ultra-paradoxical stage of transmarginal inhibition. Without the monkey bomb going off, the psychological and social landscape would not have changed to allow this possibility, and of course, Vander and his family would have been hunted to death as more and more Zonites became disillusioned with his passivity toward Piltover. Like it or not, perfect or not, Powder did save 3 members of her family. The result was not ideal, but it was certainly better than all of them being hunted and killed by Silco. At worst, Powder would be guilty of manslaughter here for the deaths of Milo and Clagger, had she not saved herself and Vi and Vander. But frankly, I don't even blame her for the deaths of Milo and Clagger, as ultimately Piltover and Heimerdinger were responsible for laying the groundwork for this event to occur. And the person more locally at fault would be Silco. I really cannot blame an 11-year-old girl for trying her best in a horrible situation and only partially succeeding. A roughly 60% success rate is still better than a total failure. And not bad for some scrawny child. All the armchair warriors want to pretend like they could do better, when in fact most of them would have pissed their pants and fainted and died. People should really try better at not making themselves out to be the heroes they are not. Like it or not, Powder was the real hero here. And you're just some loser judging from the comfort of your home. Incident 2. The Hexgate Incident. Keep in mind that shimmer does have both medicinal and military purposes. It has obviously been abused by addicts, but we cannot take things off the market just because people abuse them. Otherwise we'd have to take virtually everything off the market. Zonites do have a right to use shimmer for its medical and military values, for the sake of personal use and for the sake of strengthening their nation, just as any people have a right to medical care and self-defense, and just as any nation has a right to strengthen itself with medical and military-related technologies. Keep in mind that Vi, Sevica, and Jinx herself would be dead were it not for shimmer. And many would be left crippled without shimmer, as shimmer is necessary for medical interventions such as body replacement technology. Also, keep in mind that those Firelight wackos were attacking Jinx and Co. with deadly weapons including maces, spears and arson. Jinx had every right to defend herself and the shipment. Unfortunately, due to Sevica being too busy being glued to a box. I mean, really, Sevica, you're glued to a box. How are you gonna defend the shipment while being glued to a box? You're glued to a box, Sevica. A box, you oaf. A fucking box. Box lady. Evil box lady. Sigh. Anyway, Jinx was busy protecting the shimmer that Zonites have to produce from the time that they are children just to make ends meet, while Sevica was busy being stuck to a box. Look at you, Sevica. You're stuck to a box. A box. You're supposed to be defending the shipment, Sevica. Idiot. Don't give me that look, Sevica. You think you can do better, you loser. You are glued to a box. A fucking box. So Jinx had to defend the shipment single-handedly. And accordingly, due to being severely outnumbered 7-1, and again, due to the fact that the Firelights were using deadly weapons such as maces, spears, and arson, and due to the fact that this was a military operation to secure a bright future for Zon, Jinx was clearly within her rights to use deadly force against the Firelights. And yes, she messed up a bit and shot that idiot that tried to beat up Vi when she was 14. She was a 14-year-old girl, and you had a knife and she still kicked your ass, you turd. Maybe you deserve to be shot. Ogre. And yes, the shipment was destroyed. But she did kill most of the firelights, and she still did better single-handedly than the entire rest of her crew did. I mean, you see how well you'd do in that situation. Jinx was fighting for survival and the future of Zon. She didn't get a perfect result, but she still did better than the others, and she did better than you armchair warriors would have done with your big McDonald's guts. So give Jinx a break here. And yes, this incident does not make Jinx a murderer, again due to the fact that this was a military operation, and due to the fact that Jinx was severely outnumbered by enemies using deadly weapons. She was within her rights to use deadly force and thus did not actually murder anyone during this incident. And sure, Jinx didn't perfectly guard the cargo, but she sure made sure those firelight idiots paid the price for their assault. Keep in mind that this incident and the Piltover Square bombing incident also set the stage for Vi to be released. She may have never been released otherwise. Incident 3. The Piltover Square bombing incident. This is the incident that brought Piltover to the negotiation table. Some of you think it was just an act of terrorism, but in fact it was so much more. This incident allowed Jinx to secure the Hextech gemstone, thus allowing her to build the weapon that she would later smite the Piltover Council with, and also caused Jace and the rest of the council to consider giving Zonites their independence. This incident was in line with Silco's philosophy of the base violence necessary for change, and thus really was done under his orders, whether he wanted to accept that initially or not. This incident also revitalized the revolution, as it was clear that Silco was becoming a bit too passive and tolerant toward Piltover in his reaction to the 6 enforcers being killed. Yes, this incident brought Silco into a difficult position where he had to try to pacify Marcus, but ultimately this event was absolutely key to reigniting and continuing the Zonite revolution by bringing Piltover to the negotiation table. And yes, this incident was not a matter of direct and immediate self-defense. It was in fact a military operation aimed at achieving reconnaissance, espionage, and psychological warfare objectives. This incident allowed Jinx to steal the Hextech gemstone for the weapon, learn about the science behind Hextech, and bring the Piltover Council to the ultra-paradoxical stage of transmarginal inhibition, which brought Jace to negotiate with Silco, and the Council to accept the idea of Zon as an independent nation. I mean, there is a scene directly and clearly devoted to showing this effect of the ultra-paradoxical stage of transmarginal inhibition. So, this was no sloppy act of terrorism. It was an event necessary to propel the Zonite revolution forward to the point where the council could be brought to the negotiation table. So, this was not a matter of murder. It was an essential military operation. So the kills from this incident cannot be considered murder, especially since those fuckers murdered my family. Incident 4. The second Firelight assault. Well, this one was clearly an act of self-defense and a matter of defending technological resources, the Hextech gemstone. And yes, once again Jinx is careless with Pow Pow, she does need to work on that. Hopefully the shimmer burns up the bullets before they go too far. The shimmer does burn up the bullets. Duh. Although, proximity sensing explosive rounds are an upgrade she seriously needs to do, not only because it would massively increase the effectiveness of Pow Pow, but it could also be used to neutralize the rounds after they reached a certain distance. Already done. The shimmer infusion burns them up. But yeah, explosive rounds would be nice. But please keep in mind that during war these types of issues will arise. While they need to be mitigated, they cannot always be eliminated entirely. So was the case here, while a heavily outnumbered Jinx and Vi did their best to defend themselves and the Hextech gemstone, an essential element in the Zonite revolution, the stealing of which did bring Piltover to the negotiation table. And yes, Jinx did have the right to use lethal force against the Firelights, both due to being greatly outnumbered, and due to the Firelights using deadly weapons such as blades and maces. They tried to cut the artery in her leg. These freaks tried to cut my artery. Fuckers. So, the kills from this incident cannot be considered murder either, as this was both a defensive and military operation. Incident 5. Blasting the Council. This was the ultimate fuck you to the Piltover Council. The Council directly responsible for ruining the lives of Zonites, including Jinx's life. Piltover had killed plenty through its negligence and parasitism, Victor being a victim and example of the results of Piltover's callousness toward Zonites. This act was thus justified by its spiritual value, and thus was not an act of murder. It was furthermore justified as a necessary military act aimed at bringing Piltover to its knees under the base violence necessary for change, a doctrine that Silco embraced, to make sure the Piltover Council doesn't get too cocky thinking they were going to get more than they deserved out of any negotiations. This incident also serves as a defensive action to remind Piltover that change is not an option. Zonites have a right to not be polluted and exploited to death, and Piltover had better realize this. When considering the economic and environmental oppression that Zonites endured at the hand of Piltover and its council, how can you reasonably say Jinx had no right to take such vicious and effective action against Piltover? You cannot. Piltover resisted admitting its sins and correcting its behavior, and thus needed a bit of a spanking to give it a better understanding of just how unacceptable its actions had been. Poke a bear with a stick and expect to get mauled. So too here. Don't blame the relatively powerless for resorting to desperate measures to achieve radical results. Especially when the radical results are simply to end a hellish quality of life. Ultimately the council and the people of Piltover are at fault for all these incidents, as without their horrible influence, Jinx, Silco, Sevica and others would never have had to grow up in such horrible conditions, inspiring them to such severe actions. Many times I think the source of severe actions should be blamed more so than the more local enactor of such severe actions. You cannot starve someone and say to them, "Don't steal the bread." Better to have a bloody hand from action than an even bloodier hand from inaction. And yes, you're probably arguing that the Piltover Council had already given into the needs of Zon. But they did not. Zonites still need Shimmer for its medical and military value, and Jace had the gall to try to shut down Shimmer production. Furthermore, Jace had the gall to demand Jinx be turned over. Both Shimmer and Jinx were necessary to help entrench and prolong the change that Zonites needed. Without these two, Piltover would no longer be afraid of Zon and would have gone back to its old ways. So, blasting the council was a necessary military operation, and thus it was not murder. That super mega death rocket will serve as a reminder as to why you don't fuck with Zon. Please keep in mind the limited technology of Runeterra. The big theme that surrounds Jinx's actions is transformation of the psychological landscape via radical violent action. She did not have the internet or any form of mass communication at her disposal. So, she had to use more crude options to get the results she was after. Why do I mention mass communications? Because they allow for the opportunity of mass psychological transformation without the violence. Imagine, for example, if a cult was formed that sought to open to the public the gates of all the spy systems and their databases, both corporate and government, entrenched within our worldwide communications system. The result would be a revolution the likes of which has never been seen before, as the curtain would be pulled back and the full horror of this world would be made naked for all the world to see. Direct psychological effect options like this simply weren't available in Runeterra due to the lack of mass communications. So the options were reduced basically to direct and somewhat traditional military-style operations. Keep in mind that while Silco was horrible, he was still Zon's only real hope. Vander had been broken spiritually by the incident on the bridge, and was no longer fit to secure a proper future for Zonites. And Echo, well, he is a rather decent fellow, but does he really have what it takes to rule Zon and run the revolution? Or would he end up just as bad as or worse than Silco? Echo is already a criminal and basically a pirate, even if a rather even-handed pirate. Perhaps he will be the leader Zon needs in the future. But for now, in such difficult circumstances, I think it's better to let Silco, Jinx and Sevica handle the hard stuff. We'll reserve Echo as an option to help hold it all together during the less desperate future times. And yes, I don't much care for Silco's egotism. I mean, I realize he has to be harsh to hold things together when dealing with such rough people, but sometimes he seems a bit too cold and vicious. But again, frankly it's a good thing that people like Echo aren't allowed into Silco's position, because they'd be forced to become like Silco to survive and hold it all together. Silco was just the man for the job really. A job that necessitated a heavy hand. I want you to think about a question. Why is it alright to kill people in mass with horrible levels of pollution and economic oppression, but it's not okay to run deadly operations to end such horrors? I just want to point out that while morality is not relative, what you consider moral may not be anywhere near as moral as you think it is. Which is more moral? Letting your people slowly rot to death? Or getting a little stupid on things and shaking up the social, psychological and spiritual landscape to achieve glorious revolution? What's more moral? Doing no good because you may have to do bad? Or just going ahead and doing the best you can, even if the tools you have to do so are a bit rusty? You judge others and the way they handle desperate situations all the time, while sitting comfortably in your homes with no serious danger to worry about, living out your armchair warrior life. But how often do you think about what it's really like to be in difficult circumstances? Many times there are no perfect solutions with perfect results. Many times you just have to do the best you can, and even if the result is not perfect. Keep in mind that Jinx really was just carrying out Silco's orders. His order was the base violence necessary for change. And Silco admitted this in episode 9 while talking to Jace when Silco himself said Jinx was just carrying out his orders. All of Jinx's other actions can be covered by self-defense and military/revolutionary necessity too. Keep in mind that all military operations ultimately have one objective, and that is changing the social, psychological and spiritual landscape to a favorable state. So, yes, happy Progress Day to you all. And please follow our humble hero Jinx on her valiant crusade against oppression and injustice by the wicked and decadent Piltover. Only on Netflix. November 2024.